got to visually turn that map around because that is west and it's really east, and that is, anyway, they got the map turned upside down, and there's a marker on, there's a map that's just like that up here at the, we'll start up here at the upper end. If you come right here, you can see that line of trees ending right up there where the sun is shining. And then it looks like an island up there just over the top of that cupola or whatever you call it, on top of that boathouse. One end of it's just past it. That is the land between, that's Greens Bluff. Greens Bluff. It's between Big Nancy's Creek, named after Doublehead's sister, and this is Shoaltown Creek, that one where the point ends. And when James Wilson drew the map, he had Doublehead and Catagishki living right there at the mouth of Shoaltown Creek, and that's where Town Creek gets its name. If you come down to about where that White House is on the far bank, straight out from it is what they call the shoulder blade. Tom Hendricks wrote about his Yuchi grandmother being born on the shoulder blade. The shoulder blade was just kind of off from Cox's Island. You can look on that map there and you can kind of see where the shoulder blade is at. But Cox's Island, it got its name from Zachariah Cox, and he had 31 white fellas that come down with him, and they were going to build a blockhouse on Cox's Island up there. And the Glass, again, under the leadership of Doublehead, surrounded Zachariah Cox and told them that the river would run red with their blood if they didn't leave, and so they immediately took off and left the area. Now Cox's Creek that we went up by when we was going to Coffey's Cemetery is probably named after that Cox's family. Another Cox that comes into historical play is the Joshua Cox that bought the area at Brown's Ferry. And he married Betsy, who was a stepdaughter of Captain John Brown. Captain John Brown had been married 3 times. And so they run the ferry at Brown's Ferry up the river for a while, and it became known as Cox's Ferry. And then about in seemed like around the 1820s, Bryce M. Garner out of Fayetteville, Tennessee, bought the area from Joshua Cox, and that became Garner's Ferry on historical maps in Lawrence County. But after Bryce M. Garner left, it reverted back to Brown's Ferry, and Brown's Ferry Nuclear Plant is straight across, and Tim Gauss and I was talking about it a while ago. The old Browns Ferry Road is just as deep as that road we left over there. But anyway, this is right between Big Muscle Shoals, which stops up at the shoulder blade, which is right up there. There's a kind of a calm spot across there. Right out from that point is the end of Big Muscle Shoals, and I said that it was about 15 miles in length. Wheeler Dam is just around that corner from that point, and it's 6 miles from the eastern end of Big Muscle Shoals. So Big Muscle Shoals was about 15 miles long. So this area was between Big Muscle Shoals and Little Muscle Shoals. There was actually a series of 6 shoals. You had the Elk River Shoals, the Big Muscle Shoals right up there, and the Little Muscle Shoals starting right down here. Bainbridge is located, if you look at that, those white houses over there on the far bank, there's 2 of them. That right out in front of that was a big flat, and that's where the town of Bainbridge was built. And the road goes up right between those 2 white, that's called Bainbridge, and we were going to go to Bainbridge, but we ain't got time, but you can at least see where it's at. What else do I need to say about this? If you look at your maps, there's one on page 27, and come here. Good Time Rambler right here. I'm gonna have him, you've seen this map before, right?
Yes, sir.
You see what James Wilson wrote? Cox's lodgment from whence he was dislodged by the Cherokees under Chief Doublehead without bloodshed. That was written in 1802 when this map was produced. And that was on the Cox's Island right up there. Okay. But if you look at this map, don't pay attention to the map because the map is backwards. Right straight across in front of us, that big building there is a Robert Trent Jones golf course for the Wheeler the Fighting Joe course and the Schoolmaster course named after Wilson. Well, I think Wilson was a schoolmaster, wasn't he? Yeah, before he was president. So they named one course the Schoolmaster and they named the other one the Fighting Joe. So there's 2 full 18-hole golf courses over there. It belongs to the Retirement Systems of Alabama. If you look just upstream at that first little building there, that is Limekiln Hollow. And if you look past, between that White House and that little building there is Limekiln Hollow. If you look on up, there's another White House way up here, and you look back to the left, there's a bluff line. That's Garga Slough. Now 4 Mile Creek, 6 Mile Creek is right here. Just up from that point is 4 Mile Creek on the maps, if you look at the maps of Wilson Lake. Wilson Lake was the first lake built before TVA was organized. And when they built Wilson Lake, I have a place on Donegan Slough right across the lake over there at Donegan Slough. But Wilson Lake is the only lake in the Tennessee Valley River chain that you do not have to have, you own the land all the way to the water. There wasn't an easement. All the other lakes that were built, of course, Henry Ford was going to buy it. I think he was going to pay $1 million and something for it, and it got rejected, and then it became part of TVA, Wilson Dam did. But it was the first dam built on the Tennessee River. If you look on page, I think the Army Corps of Engineers is the one that's responsible for building the dam, but Henry Ford tried to buy it from the government for like $1 million and something. I'm not sure. But if you look on page 28, it talks about the Muscle Canal. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But I wanted to say this too. There was 3 contingents that actually shot the shoals. What they would do is they would wait at the head of Elk River Shoals at Brown's Ferry, and they'd wait for a rise in the river, and then they would take their keel boats and flat boats and they'd shoot the shoals. The first group that was documented, Ann Royal talks about on January the 20th, 1818, she visited a group of 300 that were coming down the river at that time. And then on April the 10th, 1832, Benjamin Curry, there's 380 people, which included 108 blacks, 40 whites, and 232 mixed and full-blood Cherokee Indians. Now the blacks were usually the slaves of the Cherokees. Most people don't understand that blacks owned a lot of slaves. I mean, Indians owned a bunch of slaves, but they did. On March the 13th, 1834, West Point Lieutenant Joseph W. Harris brought a contingent down, a large contingent of Cherokees, and they traveled, it was 267 miles to get to Waterloo. It took them 6 days, and they boarded steamers at Waterloo and were headed west. Another thing that's very important about this area historically is the 2 men that helped develop the canal, and there's pictures of them here. George Washington Goethals actually helped on the Riverton Canal, but he was part of this, I think he was a lieutenant when he was here, but he helped on the Muscle Shoals Canal. Now there was actually 2 canals. The first one was only built through the Big Muscle Shoals, and they sold land, the land office was at Cortland, and they sold like 400,000 acres of land. They took that money and they built the Big Muscle Shoals Canal. Well, when Norman Farrell was with the Roddy's Command, there were 60 of them in Roddy's Command at the mouth of Shoals Creek, and the Shoals Creek is, of course, right over there between us and those houses. It goes back, we crossed it up there. But anyway, when he talked about being attacked by a huge contingent of Union soldiers, and they escaped by swimming the river out to McKernan's Island. Now the creek I live on over there is called McKernan Creek. It was Big Spring Plantation, or Spring Hill Plantation is what it was called, and it was owned by Bernard McKernan, who was on the railroad board for the Decatur-Tuscumbia Railroad. But anyway, he tells about crossing the old canal. This was in 1860, I can't remember the exact date, but he's buried in Mount Olivet Cemetery in Nashville, Tennessee, and he did a diary. But he tells about crossing the old canal that was filled up with debris. And he wore a long frock coat, and he says that before they crossed, there was a contingent of Union soldiers rushed him, and they shot and killed this one guy. He said he was a young guy. Said he went up to him, said all he had was one bullet hole in that frock coat, and he didn't have a coat, so he said he didn't need it anymore, so he took it off, and he said, I wore it for the rest of the war. But if you want to go on the internet and look up Norman Farrell and the battle at the mouth of Shoals Creek, it happened right out here, right over there where that is. Now, what else do I want to talk about? All right, if you'll see these two pictures here, this is George Washington Goffles. He lived in Florence. We passed close to his house, didn't we?
When we were down there on Wood and Hermitage Drive, his house is about 300 yards from there, about 8 houses down.
Okay. He was asked what was most important in his life in completing the Panama Canal, and he said, my experience on the Muscle Shoals Canal. So he related back to building the canal through the Muscle Shoals. But they built them, the total canal system was from Riverton, which is down past Cherokee. There's a Riverton community and a road, the Rose Trail Road, I think called Rose Trail Road or something. What? Riverton Rose Trail, okay? And they built them all the way to Lock A, which was up, it's still known as Lock A today, and that's where General Joe Wheeler crossed the river on October the 9th, 1863, and he stayed at Caledonia. And while he was at Caledonia, Caledonia was owned by Colonel Richard Jones, and Richard Jones had a daughter named Daniela, and she had married Benjamin Sherrod, and he had inherited Pond Spring Plantation, which is where the Wheeler home's at today. He died just before Joe Wheeler crossed the river. So when Joe Wheeler crossed the river, he stayed at Caledonia, and Daniela had moved back. Daniela Jones Sherrod had moved back to Caledonia, and that's where he met her. 2 years later, in 1867, after he got out of prison at Fort Delaware, he was captured with Clement Claiborne Clay and Jefferson Davis, and they were all transported on a boat. And at Fort Monroe was where Jefferson Davis and Clement Claiborne Clay, the senator from Huntsville, was imprisoned. And then he was imprisoned at Fort Delaware. And after he got out of prison, he come back, Joe Wheeler come back and married Daniela Jones Sherrod, and he inherited the Caledonia Plantation and the Pond Spring Plantation. And at the Pond Spring Plantation, Dandridge Gailey was his blacksmith, and his son was helping. And they go in one day, and Dandridge Gailey was getting all of his tools, and he was leaving. They got into a confrontation, and Thomas Jones, the brother of Daniela, and Joe Wheeler shot and killed Dandridge Gailey and shot the son, but the son survived. They carried the trial to Moulton, and Colonel Richard Jones had enough influence that he got the trial transferred from Moulton to Cortland. And when they got it to Cortland, they threw the charges out on General Joe Wheeler, and they charged Thomas Jones, and then they got him acquitted. So, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the same person that got Frank James released from the thing at Huntsville when he stole money here at the Muscle Shoals Canal, he also represented Thomas Jones and Joe Wheeler. That's Leroy Pope Walker. Now, Leroy Pope Walker's daddy was John Williams Walker. He was the namesake of Walker County. When he died, they honored him by naming Walker County in honor of John Williams Walker. His granddaddy was the Leroy Pope that I told you about, that built the big, the Poplar Grove. I think that was the name of the plantation, which is the largest, earliest antebellum plantation that's still in existence today in the state of Alabama. And another thing about Madison County, there's 97 Revolutionary War soldiers that's buried in Madison County, because Madison County was, of course, the first county in Mississippi Territory, and that's where they got land grants. So you wound up, from those Revolutionary War soldiers, there's more Revolutionary War soldiers buried in Madison County than any other county in the state of Alabama. Now, William Crawford Gorgas, his deal was, he was a Surgeon General, and he was very instrumental in eradicating yellow fever and malaria. And if you go across the river to Spring Creek, you go to Leeton, you'll find these big canals that were dug. And I stood at one on Mr. Jimmy King's place that the banks were like nearly as high as that. It looked like it was 30 or 40 feet high, nearly as high as that telephone pole right over there behind us. I mean, and Pond Creek was named because of that. But anyway, Gorgas also brought with him his manservant. And he was Edward Dr. Reynolds, and he was a white Irishman with red hair, and he had married a black Creole lady in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Well, when William Crawford Gorgas comes to Hillsboro, he was responsible for the ferry across at Brown's Ferry, and he was responsible for knocking out the diseases that was killing the people that was building the canal. So when Crawford left here, he goes with Goethals. Both of them go to Panama, and they successfully complete the Panama Canal. The Reynolds guy stayed in Hillsboro, made a bottling company. He produced the first bottled drinks in North Alabama in his bottling company. He wound up owning like several thousand acres of land because he run a store. He stayed in that store 6 days a week, and he only went home on one day. And all of his kids, Colonel Arthur Graves, I interviewed him. He died not long ago, but that was his granddaddy, Colonel Arthur Graves. All of their kids married black folks, and all are scattered all over this country. But Reynolds became a very wealthy man. Anyway, let me see. Anything else? Anybody got any questions?